Welcome to the popular town of Ambleside, located in the heart of the Lake District, and on the northern tip of the mighty Windermere, England's largest lake. One of the Lake District's most historic towns, Ambleside is today a popular tourist centre surrounded by magnificent fells, raging rivers and more, making it one of the prettiest and most irresistible places to visit in the region. But along with the spectacular natural landscape that surrounds it, Ambleside is also home to many distinctive buildings, like the iconic bridge house here. This old slate house was built over the fast-flowing stream known as Ghyll in the 17th century, and over its more than 3 centuries of life, it has served a variety of different purposes. The bridge house was originally built as a mere folly, a piece of decoration, but it was later used as a cobbler's, a tea room, a whole family home, and today an information centre. And just along the stream from the bridge house, we find another historic Ambleside landmark, a former woollen mill that was built here beside the flow of Ghyll in the year 1795. Nowadays, the old mill is a lively pub that goes by the name of the Flying Fleece, paying tribute to its wool spinning heritage. But even before this building, there stood an even older mill on this site, built almost 600 years ago in the 15th century. That original mill too was powered by the force of Ghyll, which we can see flowing underneath us, and, having been built nearly 6 centuries ago, its legacy tells us just how long Ambleside has been around. But to get a better understanding of how Ambleside has evolved through the centuries into the popular destination it is today, let's take a look at where you'd find this town on a map. As we mentioned, Ambleside sits on the northern tip of Windermere, England's largest lake, in one of the highest parts of the renowned Lake District. This part of the Lake District is also the most popular with tourists, as Ambleside lies just 5 miles north of the busy lakeside tourist centre of Bowness, putting this town on the radar of the more than 15 million people who visit the Lake District each year. Most of course come to the region to explore its magical natural scenery, with Ambleside serving as a great base for hiking in the Lake District. However, many of the town's historic slate homes have also been converted to create a wider range of attractions, with this former house now the home of the Armitt Museum, Library and Gallery, an acclaimed centre that's dedicated to preserving the rich heritage of the Lake District. Just next door to the Armitt, meanwhile, you'll find a surprisingly rural outpost of a university. The buildings in front of us here make up the Ambleside campus of the University of Cumbria. The Ambleside campus is one of 6 in the university, and it's dedicated to outdoor studies, forestry and conservation. The rural setting of the Ambleside campus makes it one of the most unique university locations in the country, with no more than a couple of hundred students now based here since the campus was reopened in 2014. Though it might not sound like a lot, those couple of hundred students do also make up a modest part of Ambleside's population, which numbers around 2,600 people. That makes Ambleside one of the largest towns in the so-called South Lakes, this part of the Lake District, but you'd be hard-pressed to find a summer's day when the streets of Ambleside aren't bustling with visitors. At the height of the tourist season, just as we're walking around today, Ambleside can get extremely busy with tourists, not only because it's such a great place to visit, but also because the town is the terminus for steamer tourist boats, which cross Windermere from nearby Bowness, and which are one of the musts for visitors on a trip to the Lake District. The roaring trade in Ambleside has been powering along for the best part of 60 years now, ever since Lake District tourism really took off in the late 20th century. But while many visitors disembark the steamer boat and get a glimpse of lakeside Ambleside before returning to Bowness, many miss the hidden gems of the town further inland. We'll make our way into the packed streets of the town centre in a short while, but on the outskirts of central Ambleside here are a network of narrow, hilly streets which are far less busy with pedestrians. The narrow streets of this part of town can be a bit of a trial to navigate in a big, modern car, but on foot, This is where you can admire many of Ambleside's historic pubs. Here on Smithy Brow is the Golden Rule, one of the oldest pubs in town, which was opened all the way back in 1723. But before it became a pub, the building was a small brewery that belonged to the great Ambleside Hall, which existed around this part of town back in the 16th century. At that time, Ambleside Hall and its expansive grounds stretched right across this area of town, serving as the home of many wealthy statesmen and landowners. Little remains of Ambleside Hall, long since gone now. But the old manor house wasn't the first major settlement in the long history of this Lake District town. Settlement in Ambleside actually dates all the way back to Roman times, when a fort was founded beside Windermere in the 1st century AD. That settlement was very much concentrated by the lake, but after the Romans abandoned the area in the 4th century, the old village of Ambleside was built around here, on the hills further inland. Quietly prosperous over the 1700 years since then, Ambleside has gradually grown outwards from its hilltop location to reach the lakeside, but the lanes we're walking on now are among the very oldest in town, with the Unicorn pub that we've just passed said to be the oldest licensed establishment in Ambleside. Many of the houses and shops that we see around us here were deliberately built alongside the fast-flowing stream of Ghyll, but the old village of Ambleside rises even further up the hills from here. From the 16th century, Ambleside was centred around St Anne's Church, a now disused chapel that you'll find at the top of the steep Peggy Hill. However, as Ambleside has grown in size, the centre of town has shifted down from the top of the hill to be nearer to the lake. This shift came about as a result of Ambleside's move from traditional local industry to tourism, which dominates the local economy today. But while catering to visitors is the name of the game today, Ambleside, despite its small size and rural location, has had quite an impressive industrial track record over the last 1,000 years or so. Across the stream here, we can see an old 18th century water wheel that belonged to an old mill, and it was mills that formed the bedrock of Ambleside's industry for centuries, based around the flow of Ghyll. This area around the stream was once thriving with industrial activity, so much so that the road over the bridge here established itself as the main street in Ambleside, giving birth to the historic pubs and old shops that we've seen, while more and more mills were founded beside Ghyll as it flows downhill. Further upstream, meanwhile, you'll encounter Ghyll Force, a spectacular 70-foot tall waterfall that many visitors trek out to on a visit to Ambleside. Now, we won't have time to reach Ghyll Force today, but here in the oldest part of town, we find an interesting quirk, as the path beside Ghyll runs underneath one of the cottages, before it emerges out onto another former main street of Ambleside. This is Bridge Street, where we find ourselves beside the Old Bark Mill, an old mill that was right at the heart of Ambleside's industry. In the early days of this town's industrial history, the mills in Ambleside were primarily used for wool in textile production. However, as technology developed, Ambleside's mills began to be used to turn bark, as well as to produce bobbins, a kind of spindle traditionally used in textile mills. These bobbins were then exported to textile mills right across the country, providing a further boost to Ambleside's economy and industry. But years after the era of mills, Ambleside moved on to cater to tourists, who began coming to the Lake District in droves from the 19th century. As we mentioned, the birth of the tourist trade brought the town centre down from the top of the hill to this area, now populated by some very busy roads, and lined almost entirely with shops, pubs, and restaurants that play a big part in Ambleside's modern economy. However, even among this slightly newer area of town, you'll find a few traces of old Ambleside, such as this, Ambleside Market Cross, which was built back in the year 1651. Now doubling as the Second World War Memorial for the town, this former market cross once stood further up the road from here, on Ambleside's marketplace, once a bustling home of local commerce. The birth of the marketplace, and the market cross to go with it, came after Ambleside was granted an official market charter, which made the town a centre for trade, boosting profits for the local mills producing products such as paper, bark, corn and cloth. The mill's owners, meanwhile, who were gaining immense wealth from their operations, built large summer houses here, like the large cream-coloured Ambleside Salutation Hotel that we can see up in front. These summer houses emerged in the early stages of the Lake District's growth from a region of rural industry to becoming a leisure destination, initially only open to the upper classes in society. Nowadays, of course, the Lake District is open for all to visit and explore, and it's become one of the most popular destinations in the UK, with Ambleside in particular a prime spot to visit. The Lake District initially emerged as a widely accessible tourist area with the arrival of the railways, but the line didn't quite extend towards Ambleside. So, in the 1960s, when car ownership made Ambleside more easily accessible, the town began to actively expand its range of shops, including the Market Cross retail area here, which replaced the town's old bus station. On a walk around the modern centre of Ambleside today, you'll now see retail dominating pretty much every street in town, signalling the shift in focus in the town's economy. Now, despite their beautiful appearance that fits in wonderfully with the heritage of the Lake District, the buildings in this part of Ambleside are of course much newer than those which we saw nearer the top of the hill. Here on Compston Road, rows of shops were built in the 1850s, as ever-growing numbers of wealthy tourists began flocking to Ambleside. The emergence of tourism in Ambleside led to the town's population more than doubling in the 19th century, as many moved here to set up new businesses to cater to visitors. Of course, at first, these visitors were almost exclusively upper-class holidaymakers, and while a train line towards the shores of Windermere was built in the 1840s, making the Lake District more widely accessible, the generally wealthier clientele in Ambleside prevented the line from reaching this town, so as to preserve its exclusive reputation. But despite this, new roads were eventually built through this town, allowing people to simply drive into town, leading to a further boom of tourism here in the late 20th century. And as you'll have gleaned from seeing the crowds on the streets in town, that boom in tourism is still continuing strongly, providing something for everyone to do and explore. Fans of history and architecture can admire local landmarks like the local Baptist Church here, which bears the same appearance as the many slate-constructed homes built around the Lake District for centuries. But as we mentioned, while the town centre is busy with shops, restaurants, cafes and even a pair of cinemas, a trip into the natural landscape surrounding Ambleside can't be missed. Hiking is extremely popular with visitors to the town, with long walking routes heading out into the mountains, which will take you to everything from great waterfalls to soaring peaks that offer stunning views of the Lake District, as well as more windows into the history of this famous region. For example, an easy walk to the south of the town centre here will take you towards Windermere, on the shore of which you'll find the remnants of Ghyll, the Roman fort that was built nearly 2,000 years ago in the year 79 AD. The fort was constructed as a part of the Romans' efforts to consolidate power in their imperial province of Britannia, and Ghyll here became a major regional centre at the time, being linked by road to two major locations: a port on the Cumbrian coast to the west at what is today Ravenglass, as well as the Roman city of Luguvalium, now Carlisle, and Hadrian's Wall to the north. But the Romans weren't the only invaders to settle in this area, as Ambleside is a town with strong Viking roots too, and it was the Vikings who are thought to have given the town its name, Ambleside deriving from Aumelsæter, which means river sandbank summer pasture. Over time, the Vikings integrated with Celtic and Anglian peoples already living here, and they went on to establish Old Ambleside on the hill, where we were earlier. Now, as we mentioned, Old Ambleside was centred around the historic St Anne's Church, but as the town expanded and moved down the hill, a new parish church was needed, that being the imposing St Mary's here, which was built in 1854, featuring a towering spire that dominates the local landscape. St Mary's, a grand Victorian church, is unusually large for the Lake District, as it was built to preempt Ambleside's fast-growing population in the 19th century. Set among an expansive churchyard that's also home to Ambleside's Methodist Church, St Mary's is unusually large for the Lake District, as it was built to preempt Ambleside's fast-growing population in the 19th century. At the back of the churchyard, meanwhile, we also find an often overlooked memorial dedicated to locals who have lost their lives in conflicts around the world. Unveiled in 1921, the cross bears the names of 94 Ambleside men who've died in wars over the last century. One of a number of memorials to be found around town, developers in Ambleside in the 1850s also planned to build another grand memorial dedicated to a famous local poet, that being William Wordsworth, born in the town of Cockermouth to the northwest in 1770, and who died just outside Ambleside in 1850. Wordsworth was one of the defining figures of the Romantic age of English poetry, famed for works such as I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, and many more. And he's still widely celebrated across the Lake District, with his grave located in the parish churchyard of Ambleside's neighbouring village of Grasmere. Now, while a memorial to Wordsworth was planned here in the busier town of Ambleside too, it was eventually shelved as developers made building St Mary's Church a priority. However, a number of the church's windows are dedicated to Wordsworth and the people with whom he shared his life, much of it spent in his home region, often working right here in Ambleside too. But William Wordsworth isn't the only famous literary figure to have spent time here in Ambleside. Beloved children's writer Beatrix Potter, the author of The Tale of Peter Rabbit and many more iconic stories, also visited Ambleside on a number of occasions, as she holidayed nearby when she was a child. Later on in life, Potter moved to Hilltop Farm on the western side of Windermere, where she wrote many of her famous tales that are still popularly read by children today. Now out of the churchyard, we're coming towards the end of our walk around Ambleside, a marvellous town which has its own magnificent story to tell. Having evolved remarkably over the centuries, Ambleside is a great success story through history, having always seen a degree of prosperity ever since the first mills were built here centuries ago. Once a surprisingly powerful centre of industry and trade situated around the rushing waters of Ghyll, Ambleside developed from a thriving market town into one of the most popular tourist destinations in the beloved Lake District. And whether it's history, scenery, shopping, or pure relaxation, there really is something for everyone here in Ambleside. So, as we pass by yet more characterful Victorian houses positioned beside the town's park, we've reached the end of our walk in Ambleside for today. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you're now looking forward to visiting Ambleside for yourself in future too.